Good evening and welcome. You are watching The Big Story on NDTV Profit and I'm Nupur Talwar Suri. As corporate India pushes for more diversity in hiring, this priority is now reflecting in temporary hires for the festive season. Companies in various sectors have come out with mandates that encourage hiring women for roles that were traditionally considered to be male-dominated. Is this something that could drive change in mindsets and make this a priority for India Inc.? We discuss this and more on The Big Story this evening.
There is a rise in trend of diversity hiring in the Indian workspace. Most formal sectors in our country, including both government and corporate, are pushing for diversity hiring. This is also the case with temporary recruitment during high demand periods like the festive season, which fosters revenue for multiple businesses. In fact, as per the latest Founded Insights Tracker report for June 2024, diversity hiring has increased by 33% on a year-on-year basis. This indicates the growing focus of companies on diversity and inclusion policies. E-commerce, logistics, retail, hospitality, manufacturing, consumer durables, and BFSI are some of the sectors showcasing this trend. But the sectors leading the diversity hiring swing are BFSI and IT software and services. Companies are also focusing on hiring more women and offering skill development programs to improve their employability. This, according to recruitment's firm, is because women project both lower attrition rate and absenteeism. Some of the high demand roles for women are sales associate, customer service representative, in-store promoter, personal finance, and retail insurance sales, among many others. According to Rituparna Chakraborty, a corporate strategist and independent director, India Inc.'s extension of gender diversity initiatives into temporary hiring during the festive season is a promising step forward. However, true progress will be achieved when diversity moves beyond seasonal trends and becomes a year-round priority.
And in fact, to discuss this and more, we are in fact joined by Rituparna Chakraborty. She is a corporate strategist and independent director. Shantanu Rooj. Shantanu, good to have you back on the show. He's the founder and CEO of Team Lee's EdTech, and Ankita Banerjee, the head EDI APAC Randstad. Good evening, all of you. Thank you for joining us. To you first, Rituparna, we just heard your comment there. Now, of course, data that's coming in seems to suggest that the diversity push, and today, of course, we don't seem to have diversity on this panel dominated by women. But anyways, I was asking you, data that's coming in seems to suggest that the diversity push that we are seeing in Indian corporates may now be extending to temporary hirings. What is your sense of on this and on the larger picture?
First and foremost, it's a welcome trend. I mean, whichever way it comes, whether it comes through the hiring of more temporary workers who are diverse in nature or otherwise. So, I mean, every attempt in the direction of making the workplace more diverse is obviously welcome. But yes, I think side by side, like I said just a while ago to Mallika, that I think the issue right now is that can we sustain it and make it a much more long-term impact rather than just focus on this being a scenario when there is high demand. You know, obviously there is a season which is coming. I mean, the highest domestic consumption season is around the corner. The festival season is about to start. So there are extra pair of hands and legs that are required, and there is shortage of skills and shortage of talent. And of course, employers will have to now take serious cognizance of the fact that women are probably an important part of their hiring strategy. But having said that, I think I do believe that India is still far, far behind in terms of where we ought to be in terms of making workplace diverse. And hence, this cannot be episodic, this cannot be a seasonal trend, and this cannot be only at entry level. I mean, we all know, as a matter of fact, my belief is over the last 2 decades, India has done particularly well in terms of being very inclusive for entry-level profiles for women. But essentially, the challenge or the actual reality or the shocker is what happens to women after they've spent about 4 or 5 years at the workplaces. So I guess that's where the change is required. But I welcome this move. And the fact that a lot more sectors and industries are now opening doors to having more women itself is fascinating. I mean, I was so happy that in the last 1 week, 2 of the e-commerce delivery agents on my doorstep happened to be a woman. And I hope that what is happening in Bangalore translates all across the country and across profiles. So this change is very much needed. It's late, but I'm glad that it's here.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Shantanu, now, there has been a lot of corporate focus on diversity and inclusion. In fact, India has seen about a 33% surge in diversity hiring. This is according to a June report of Founders Insights Tracker. Now, do you see temp hiring as an extension of the overall picture? And are you hopeful that the narratives may now finally be changing?
So, Nupur, thanks so much. However, if you look at the reasons why this is happening, right? So Ritu talked about it. But then apart from policy decisions, but there are a lot of corporates who are looking at innate advantages of having a lot of women in the workforce. They're talking about lower attrition level because women are supposed to be less fickle by nature. There are certain job roles where the efficiency is much higher. For example, the entire electronics industry prefers women workforce in the assembly lines. And they also talked about absenteeism, which is much better in a women workforce in this case. And what works for the short term obviously works for the long term as well, because the problems that you're solving by this diversity is actually not just a short-term problem. It's actually the biggest problem that CEOs in some of these industries face. So I'm very hopeful that this particular initiative, which is starting off possibly today and is being talked about because there's a lot of surge in hiring because of festive season, is going to have a long shadow in the long term.
Right, so we are hoping that this is going to be something that will be adopted in the long term as well. Let me also bring in Ankita now. Ankita, what do you make of this trend? And do you see any particular changes that are driving it?
Excellent point, Nupur. I think what is happening right now is, I think companies are increasingly realizing and recognizing that by having a more diverse workforce, we are able to be more innovative, productive, and of course, future focused. And to become an attractive employer, it also means that I should be able to attract potential talents, future candidates. And that means that I should also be able to reflect the society that I operate in and the values of equity and inclusion that the newer generations truly believe in. And through these inclusive policies and programs and what I'll call reasonable accommodations, we should be able to attract talent in a talent scarce market. And the narrative that I see changing is across the board. We definitely need to have more women role models. So what Ritu spoke about, like moving from entry level to more leadership roles for not just for women, but for other minoritized groups as well. But also collectively, I think as individuals and as organizations, we need to recognize the kind of heteronormative, gender normative, ableist biases and prejudices that we have. So I think that's a collective effort that needs to take place. And it will only be supplemented by, policy and structure level changes where we have, more, flexible, gender inclusive, as well as welcoming policies, like inclusive and accessible restrooms, lactation rooms, more generous parental leaves for traditional as well as for non-traditional families. So yes, I think I'm very proud of the movement that we've seen in the recent past, and that's ongoing. But it's an evolution. We can't rest on our laurels immediately. There's a lot of work that still needs to happen.
Right, Shantanu. Do you see that multinationals, which essentially do have a very well-defined diversity and inclusion practices, are perhaps at the forefront of this trend, or do you feel that India Inc. is catching up very, very quickly?
So yeah, multinationals come in at the forefront because they have a policy pushing them to ensure that there is a lot of inclusion and diversification in the workspace. But interesting space in this case, Nupur, is that the entire India INC is actually waking up to this. And they're waking up just not because they love getting a lot of women in the workforce, but because the real sheer merit of getting women workforce in this inside, right? Interestingly, if you look at some of the statistics which are available there, Nupur, you'll see that this change is happening both in the white collar jobs as well as in the blue collar jobs. Organizations in the logistics segments, which is and job roles like loaders, packers, inventory managers, even people are seeing women there. And Ritu talked about the delivery girl who came in. So I think we are seeing the change all across the spectrum. Possibly it's showing up in the fringes at the lower end of the spectrum, but then soon we'll start seeing this going up to the higher echelons of the corporate world.
Well, absolutely. Breaking the glass ceiling isn't that easy, but coming to you, Rituparna, what's very interesting in this trend that we are seeing is that traditionally there was a mindset of not employing women during the festive season because they were they were known to be the center of the family and there were a lot of traditions around the festive season, but that is breaking and that's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I think essentially when, obviously India Inc. is realizing that if you do not cast the net wide and you do not have access to the right kind of skill sets which are available, and women do possess the skill sets, the attitude, the mentality, the ability to perform some of these, they are only will be at the losing end. And I think that realization has also led to organizations focusing on more in terms of what they can do to make women more welcome at workplaces. Family pressure and challenges exist, but is there a way by which you can provide more flexibility, access to job places which are closer to where they stay? I think corporate Inc. probably is going the extra mile to kind of accommodate some of their challenges. If there are specific days that women probably would want to spend more time, I have a feeling, and I also see that happening, that there is a change in approach in the organization's recruitment policy, that let's go that extra mile, let's do some of these changes. But you know what? I'm gonna sound like a broken record when I say this. First and foremost, temporary staffing has always been the flag bearer of being more inclusive for job market outsiders. In this case, women who are not in the workplaces, I do consider them as job market outsiders. From that perspective, temporary staffing has been doing a fantastic job in changing the entire nation's ecosystem by getting them in. But I think somewhere down the line, I do feel that the pressure that the organizations feel during this, probably the next 4 months, 6 months, and which actually leads them to make some of this accommodation, I'm not too sure they're doing it all around the year, and that ought to change. And just because you need more hands and legs during a particular season, you're of course going to go the extra mile. But are you actually listening, paying attention to what essentially is required to make them welcome at workplaces, at different roles, at more senior roles? Is something that probably is a topic for another discussion. But I welcome the move, but I'm not going to sit back saying we've done enough.
Right, that's a very good point, and I want to bring in Ankita on this one. Even as employers are looking to hire more women in the festival season, what is it that they're offering them? Are they offering them more flexibility? Because at the end of the day, they are still the center of the Indian household, so they will need that flexibility around them. Are they, so flexibility perhaps in terms of working hours, more transport facilities? Because, if you're looking to get more women into the workforce in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities, that is something that should be the core of your policy. So do you see that happening at all?
Absolutely. I think more and more organizations are able to offer what it's called, flexibility with intentionality. Because let's face it, women continue to, especially in India, have, disproportionate responsibility of caregiving and, domestic responsibilities again. So yes, companies are offering that, more flexible hours, definitely transport. Also, I see there's an increase in terms of benefits like, better security, better, access to changing rooms, lactation rooms. These are some of the conversations that are happening. But I think there needs to be a larger focus. So it should not be, a moment of, focus or highlight where we are only doing this around certain times where we have more women employees, but to make this a more well-furnished, a more sustainable movement, I think we need to make policy level changes, structure level changes. that will lead us to better retention of this talent, as well as being able to welcome a more and more diverse, populations and communities within our workforce.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Shantanu, now, are there any particular roles where women actually pip men? For instance, the Foxconn factory in Tamil Nadu, which has about 70% women as compared to 30% men. This, of course, is according to the company's press release that was issued around a controversy. But are there more such roles that would be more suited to women?
No, Foxconn is just a company example, but then the entire electronics assembly line industry is talking about women being much more productive because of the dexterity in on their fingers, right? So that's one. But then there are several industries who actually vouch for women in their workforce. Look at the entire e-commerce. The roles like customer service, sales associate, telesales. All of these roles are actually women have been outperforming men in many of these things. And now the women coming into the blue collar job as well, I think men have got serious competition there. Interestingly, just to add to whatever Ankita said, apart from all of those functionalities, all of those advantages, and all of those facilities that employers are willing to give to women this time, I think they are also willing to give them all much better wages that they gave them earlier about, right? So the difference between the wages to male as well as female, I think there was a gap. That gap is now reducing. And there's a clear recognition that what works for India INC during crisis times obviously works for them even when the crisis has passed off. So this is going to long-term stay.
So Shantanu, what you are saying is that we may not be seeing equal pay for equal work yet. That is perhaps still work in progress. But what we are seeing is that gap narrowing. Now, on the other side, what are the sectors that don't really hire women, which still seem to traditionally and continue to prefer a more male-dominated workforce? And what are the changes that can be made in those?
So there are some industries, for example, let's say telecom, for example. There's industry which have got a lot of field work, industries where there is a lot of physical strength which is required. And there have been industries which are traditionally have been male dominated. Some of these industries have been actually slow takers. I mean, most of them are agreeing that getting in women actually doesn't harm them. It actually the benefits that women bring in terms of lower attrition, better productivity, and their ability to be more empathetic in this entire leadership style, I think is becoming very important for them. But some industries have been more aggressive than some of the other ones. Yeah, so that's what we have been noticing.
Right, absolutely. Rituparna, any thoughts on that? Because, there are still some male bastions which we are not able to break through. And we have often seen many examples as working women in our careers as well of this.
Indian Army. I don't think in the right places we have enough women in leadership. Much as that, the premier technology institutes in India still do not have a woman chief, by the way, since it was since inception. I mean, these are some numbers that I'm recalling off the hand. I think, Reserve Bank of India. I mean, CBI. I mean. I'm so sorry to kind of call this out, but I know there are women in some of these institutions, but we still do not have women leaders. So it's not that they don't hire women, but that's very important because that's essentially how signaling starts. Of course, I agree with Shantanu. He's called out some of the sectors. I do believe that while there are some multinationals in the manufacturing space who are trying to kind of usher in some changes by bringing women at workplaces, but by and large, the larger part of the Indian manufacturing ecosystem is still not ready to welcome doors to women. And there are honestly plenty of sectors which are still pretty much male dominant factor. I know we see some changes happening in the likes of BFSI and IT and retail, for example, which hires a lot of women. But I believe that there is a large number of industries and sectors which still have not become as inclusive as it ought to be, and probably have still a diversity ratio which is less than 20%, and that ought to change. So I will say that there is now sectors where there is absolutely no women, but it's a worry that some of them have never had any women in leadership, and that itself is not the right role model to attract more women.
Right. Coming to you, Ankita. Ankita, sometimes a lot of these temp roles actually can create a pipeline of talent for full-time and permanent positions. Now, do you see that happening? Are you hopeful of that? And what is it that companies can actually do to make sure that these temp roles then get converted into more permanent positions?
Absolutely. I think that's a growing trend. We see increasingly more organizations looking at that talent pool as well. I think one of the ways that we can intervene and make this more realistic is to offer, upskilling opportunities, even for our, temp workers, give them those opportunities to, again, raise their hands if they see certain roles come in, which are perm roles with the organization, and move. So looking at that cross-pollination of talent as well. And of course, to continue to focus on while you bring in that talent through, the temp route, but also look at how are you bolstering your internal, workforce environment, your ecosystem and practices to be able to, attract that talent, of course, retain that talent as well. So I think a lot of organizations are doing that today, and it's a great move in the right direction. I think we need to also support talent in the right way possible as well.
Right, Shantanu, any thoughts on that? How do we convert these temporary positions into more permanent roles? And the second point that I wanted to get your view on was Rituparna mentioned at the beginning, that you can get a lot of women to enter the workforce, but keeping them there has always been a challenge. What happens to them 4-5 years down the line? So how do companies work around that?
So two things. At TeamLease, we have been observing that a lot of employers have been taking this temporary staffing very seriously out there. They have those concentric circles of their workforce, and temporary workforce is being taken up very seriously now. They're willing to invest in upskilling them. There are several hundreds of employers today who are approaching us to tell us that they're willing to invest in, for example, degree connectivity solutions to this workforce who are coming in for the temporary purposes, and to ensure that they build up a long-term career for these candidates. They're willing to invest so that the productivity goes up, attrition comes down, or possibly the hiring costs comes down there. That's one thing that we have been noticing from that part. Yeah.
All right. Rituparna, you were talking, as I was saying, that you were talking about the bit that getting these women to stay is a challenge. And companies need to work on that continuously. And we've seen that as well in, the various organizations that we have seen that women join very enthusiastically, but often get weighed down by, the many cares in the world that they have to face.
Of course. And honestly, on this part, while there is a lot corporates can do, a lot government can do, but there's a lot women have to do this area. So while I'm somebody who's been advocating having more women in workforce, keeping them in workforce, but I also am aware of the fact that somewhere we as women have to do more. We have to have higher aspirations from our own selves, and we have to stick it out. I mean, the reality that we live in India with a kind of infrastructural challenge, with a little or no support in terms of managing children, in terms of the ecosystem, are our realities, but we still have to confront all of that and tell ourselves that we do not have a plan B. I mean, the issue, I know it's a very unpopular view that I'm probably articulating, but I have to say it, that the fact that we consider that we as women, we have an option or optionality of not working, somewhere we'll have to tackle that first. So having said that, I think, of course, corporate India have to make peace with the reality that women will probably, if at the childbearing stage and when they are about to become a mother, they would typically be off the grid for about 6 months. I know that there's a lot of controversy around the Maternity Benefit Act, and it's justified. But having said that, whether you had that act or not, women usually typically spend 6 months away, even if earlier we had just 3 months. So my point is that let's factor that in. The mathematics of why you still have to encourage women, motivate women, and get them work. I think there's enough study done by BCG, by McKinsey, which says the mathematics of how it helps organizations. As a matter of fact, there are studies done on listed companies globally, which shows that the ones which are more diverse and have more women in the same industry peer category are more profitable than the ones who are not. So the mathematics obviously is already in place. We just have to accept it. We have to play the long innings here and allow women the safety net to be able to remain in the workplace, remain productive, continue to invest in their upgradation of their skill set and also their morale. I mean, somewhere I think even before someone else decides whether we are capable or not, I think in our own mind we tell ourselves we are not good enough, and I think that obviously has to change. But this is where I think the help from the organizations are required. And from a policy perspective, I know we've come up with this policy where we have made women directors on boards a mandatory ask, but still 90% of the listed companies have a woman director. And the funniest part is that single digit of these women directors come from an executive director position or who had an executive position in their boards before they joined in. So we have a lot of thinking to do, that let's not just have policies which become just a compliance stick, but we need to make policies which actually enable the ecosystem from a win-win perspective to have more women. And I think once we are all aligned on that front, you will see change. At the moment, all I can say is that we just need more women climbing up the ladders. When women go up the ladder and they are in decision-making places, whether in corporate India or in government, you will see the changes that we are all expecting.
And perhaps as you're pointing out, the trickle-down effect will be sooner. Ankita, any last thoughts on this?
Absolutely, Nupur. There's one thing that I'd like to share that we, talk often in Randstad is inclusion is not a zero-sum game. Just because you're including or welcoming diversity in the workplace does not mean you're excluding somebody else. I think I'm very glad to see this conversation happening about gender diversity, to have more women in the workplace. But I think there's also a growing need to look at other minoritized groups as well. And especially from a perspective where we want to be reflective of the society and the world that we work in. So, and that just does not start with India and Inc., but also with our academic institutions, with our society, even at our family levels, within our loved ones. So I think that's where I see. And of course, enabling, while you get in women, it's also about enabling women, enabling them to be where they want to be in terms of their career aspirations, respecting their choices. Right. I think that's really important. And therefore, I hope we'll be on our way to a more equitable and inclusive society world.
Shantanu, as the only man on the panel, any last thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
No, so I think this is really encouraging, Nupur, that there's so many industries, so many employers are really supporting the cause of getting a lot of women into the workforce. What works for everybody during the crisis times works even when the crisis gets over. I'm really very encouraged, and I think that India has a great future coming forward.
All right. So on that note, thank you, all three of you, for joining us on the big story. And we are all hoping, of course, that this is not just a trend that we are talking about today. It actually extends to later on as well. Thank you for joining in. Well, with that, it's a wrap on the big story. Thank you very much for joining in. But news and updates continue on NDTV Profit. So stay with us.